Of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. So we have some concerns about audio feedback. So before I begin, I'd like all members and other in-person participants to consult with the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. We have to protect the hearing of our interpreters. Only use the black approved earpiece. And when you're not using earpiece, please put it at the sticker provided on your table. Thank you for your cooperation. Today's meeting is in hybrid format. Before speaking, please wait till I recognize you by name. For members in the room, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. For members on Zoom, please use the raise the hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your understanding in this regard. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. So before we start with the opening speech, okay, yes, Member Maxime Bloch.
Madame la Présidente, vous retrouverez le consentement.
Madam Chair, you'll find a unanimous consent to change the date for tabling our last document on funding in secondary institutions. There's a miscommunication. Some members thought it was Monday, May 27th at 7 p.m., but actually it was Friday, May 24th at 5 p.m. So I spoke to my colleagues and they said they would support me.
You have unanimous consent to allow those additional ones that were misinformed to submit and be accepted? Great. Thank you very much. So now we'll move on to opening statements. So pursuant to Standing Order 1083I and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, January 31st, 2023, the committee resumes its study of science and research in Canada's Arctic in relation to climate change. It's now my pleasure to welcome to the committee from the National Research Council of Canada, Anne Barker, Director, Arctic and Northern Challenge Program, and Dr. Shannon Quinn, the Secretary General from the same organization. From the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, Dr. Ted Hewitt, the President, and Dr. Sylvie Lemeroux, Vice President of Research. You have up to 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Ms. Barker, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, thank you for the invitation to speak to you today about the National Research Council of Canada as part of this committee study on science and research in Canada's Arctic in relation to climate change.
Acknowledging that the research activities of the National Research Council take place on traditional unceded territories of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Today, we are appearing here in Ottawa on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. We are inspired by the relationship that the Algonquin Anishinaabe have with water, which is critically impacted by climate change. We look to the water as a means of understanding climate change, as its changes in state inform us in that regard. Nous sommes conscients du privilège qui nous a été.
We are aware of the privilege that we have to do research and innovation on this land, and that is why we want to show our respect to the Indigenous peoples.
National Research Council. And in this capacity, I am responsible for advancing Government of Canada science, research, and innovation. I'll tell you just a few things about the NRC as a whole. Le CNRC est le plus vaste.
The NRC is the biggest research organization of the state. It does research and provides solutions based on science. The NRC does work in institutions everywhere in Canada and also collaborates with other institutions in the country. scientists, engineers, and other specialists work together with other organizations and also with the universities, colleges, industry, and public institutions so that research and technologies go from the lab to the marketplace.
Strategic priorities, as reflected in our recently released strategic plan, are to advance research and innovation for the benefit of Canada. These areas include, and importantly for the purposes of this committee, climate change and sustainability, health and biomanufacturing, digital and quantum technologies, and foundational research primarily in the areas of astronomy and metrology. I'll now turn to my colleague, Dr. Ann Barker, Director of the Arctic and Northern Challenge Program, who will use the remainder of our opening remarks to speak specifically about Arctic research.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to participate. The creation of NRC's Arctic and Northern Challenge program stemmed from a ministerial direction in 2018 to create a research program on the North. Through extensive Northern engagement, this program has been aligned with the needs of Northerners and endorsed by them throughout its design, launch, and delivery. Now in year 3, the program's vision is that, guided by Northerners, the daily lives of Arctic and Northern peoples are improved through applied technology and innovation. Its objectives are that Arctic and Northern peoples participate in the design, governance, delivery, and dissemination of applied research to address challenges identified by them, and that Northern research and development capacity has been built and increased to solve pressing issues confronting Northerners. Le CNRC injectera plus.
The program is supported through the NRC's Collaborative Science and Technology Innovation Program, whereby NRC is investing over $22 million over 7 years to partner NRC researchers and research facilities with Northern territorial and Indigenous governments, research institutions, industry, and communities on projects that enable sustainable economy and support a healthy future for Arctic and Northern peoples within thematic research areas of housing, health, food, and water.
That having more diverse teams leads to better research results, with complementary competencies coming together for added value in research. NRC recognized early on that funding alone was not sufficient to enable these research partnerships. Rather, we needed to also consider broad eligibility instead of a narrow definition of who can conduct research, changes to support Northerners' participation in research development, flexibility in funding approaches, and adapting to the realities of undertaking research in the North, such as high travel costs, the need for honoraria for elders, translation and Wi-Fi costs, data storage capabilities, and development of local training opportunities. In addition, in alignment with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action number 57, thank you.
Barker, you can bring forward some of those remarks in further testimony. Dr. Hewitt, I now invite you to make an opening statement of 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. Madam Chair, as President of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, or SSHRC as we call it, and as Chair of the Steering Committee for the Tri-Agency Institutional Programs Secretariat, both of which work closely with other federal research funding agencies on various Arctic-related research initiatives. Comme vous le savez, les communautés du Nord canadien, dans beaucoup.
As you know, Northern communities, many of which are Indigenous, are among the most vulnerable to climate change. They are witnessing firsthand the devastating impacts a changing climate is having across Arctic's ecosystems, livelihoods, health, Indigenous culture, and a traditional way of life that has existed for generations. This reality reinforces the importance of research, including interdisciplinary work, to address the complex challenges faced in the Arctic. It also underscores the necessity of Indigenous-led research to respond to locally defined research priorities.
Current Arctic research initiatives build on the success of our past investments, like in ArcticNet and Sentinel North. These projects bring together scientists from various disciplines with partners from northern communities, government agencies, and the private sector, as well as international partners to study the impacts of climate change in the Canadian North. Through the Tri-Agency New Frontiers in Research Fund, we're also aligned with the Scandinavian Research Council's collective Nordforsk International Research Initiative on Sustainable Development of the Arctic to further promote large-scale, interdisciplinary, and collaborative research in the region. This international partnership includes Canada, the United States, and several Nordic European countries. En outre, par l'entremise du Fonds Nouvelle France,
Through the New Frontiers in Research Fund, SSHRC will administer $20 million over 4 years to create new knowledge for sustainable development of the Arctic. It will expand our understanding of how best to address complex climate change that impacts Canada's north. As a condition of joining the program, SSHRC stipulated that Indigenous communities must be involved in the design, development, and leadership of any project deemed eligible for funding.
Arctic-related research through its core funding on topics such as climate change adaptation and mitigation, energy and resources, sustainable development, geopolitics, food security, and many other areas. Between 2018 and mid-2023, SSHRC awarded over $67 million in funding to support northern research, including on Arctic-related topics. These grants are administered at post-secondary research institutions across Canada, but notably as well at Yukon University, Nunavut Arctic College, and Aurora College in the Northwest Territories. Comme je l'ai mentionné, le SRSH comprend que le droit.
As mentioned, SSHRC understands that Indigenous rights to self-determination as they relate to Arctic research include leadership of and governance over research conducted in their communities. This commitment is reinforced through the Strengthening Indigenous Research Capacity Initiative, a priority of the Canada Research Coordinating Committee led by SSHRC, which affirms Indigenous knowledge systems, approaches to learning, and means of sharing knowledge. We have developed a new category of funding eligibility for Indigenous not-for-profit organizations as part of our response to Call to Action 65 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report.
Eligible Indigenous institutions in this category. These include the Dicinta Center for Research and Learning, as well as the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation in the Northwest Territories, along with the Qaaqayartit Health Research Center in Nunavut. Madam Chair, we're determined that northern researchers and communities and the institutions that serve them play a central role in Arctic research, given the direct impacts climate change have on them. Je me ferai un plaisir de vous en dire plus sur les activités de recherche liées à l'Arctique.
I would be pleased to provide further insights into our Arctic-related research activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hewitt, we look forward to your testimony. So we'll now begin our first round of questions from the floor. Please be sure to indicate to whom your questions are directed, and we'll start with MP Lobb for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Wanted to ask Ms. Quinn or Ms. Barker a question. I was just looking at one grant that was received. It was from Queen's University. I mean, you don't have to specifically, but just generally, how do these work? Polar Knowledge Canada is the organization. The program name, Northern Science and Technology Program, and the location is at Kingston, Ontario. And that grant is $450,000 for 3 years. How does that work? I know you don't have to speak specifically about the one I just mentioned, but do the researchers, do they research from Kingston? Do they work with the Polar Group? Or how does that work? How's the mechanics of all this work?
Sure, I can take that question. So I can't speak to Polar Knowledge Canada's funding itself, but for the program.
It's funded through the Government of Canada, though.
Yes.
It's a grant through the Government of Canada.
Yes, however, grants and contributions, many have different types of terms and conditions. So within the National Research Council and our Arctic and Northern Challenge program, the direction really comes from Northerners. So you could have an organization like Queen's or another university that may be the project lead. Generally, that is often by capacity limitations in the north. So a northern organization may choose to have a university partner, for example, within our programs, who helps administer the research, moves the funds, and advances the research itself. But in other cases, it could be a northern-led organization. So we have a number of projects, for example, NNC, that's Nunavut Nukusateret Corporation, which is the Nunavut Renewable Energy Company in the north. They are the lead applicant, but they have partnered with a southern-based university to support them in their research. So it really depends on a case-by-case basis, depending on the capabilities and competencies and capacity.
The granting councils, how many dollars per year are allocated to the Arctic?
I can't comment on that. We're not a granting council in that respect. NRC's grants and contributions are there to enable NRC researchers in our facilities to come together with Northerners in this particular program to advance research. We also have our Industrial Research Assistance Program, which provides funds for small and medium enterprises. But I think maybe you can clarify in the context of your question if you're looking for the tri-councils in terms of funding, in which case I would need to defer to colleagues.
Okay. Maybe just one other, and anybody can grab this question. We've heard from a lot of people that have talked about the coordination of efforts in the Arctic. I think that's a fair question, fair request. And if you go through a lot of the dollars that have been allocated up there, there's a lot of dollars spent studying caribou, which is important. There's a lot of dollars in all different regions studying shorelines, water, ice. Not just in one spot, but obviously it's a massive area. How's all that coordinated? How do you prevent from duplication? How do we do that? Is there one person you can go to, one place, they say, yeah, we got it. There's a machine behind the scenes that's making all this work.
Say at this point, we do not have that level of coordination. It really, in my opinion, our funds tend to help with some of that coordination, so we tend to be coordinated around funding sources. However, there is networks of excellence that we've had in the past that help with some of that coordination to see who is doing what research. Across the north, all of our northern regions have research licensing approaches, wherein to perform research in these regions, you need to obtain a research license. That also assists with coordination because those who are seeing the research that's happening in their regions are being informed ahead of time about what may be coming and have the opportunity to comment.
Now, do I have any time left, Madam Chair?
Yes, you have a minute and a half.
Thank you. I know there is definitely limited relations at this point in time with Russia, who's a key contributor to all the pollution that takes place up there. In spite of those, is there contact with Russian Arctic researchers at all, or is that there's no relationship? Does anybody know of the research that they're doing up there? Is there coordination with them or with anybody else, or is that completely off the table?
Since the invasion of Ukraine, the National Research Council has not had any coordinated research with Russia, so that has been stopped at this point.
Mr. Hewitt, do you have anything you want to add on all the questions that have been asked there?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we would encourage as funders is the development of research programs and ideas and projects locally in the north. So that may give an appearance of a lack of coordination, but we tend to emphasize very strongly that those projects be developed there and be undertaken there and led by communities in the north or institutions in the north, sometimes with the support of other institutions from southern Canada. But that's increasingly the direction we're moving in. We're also engaged in coordinated international efforts, like our climate change mitigation call with 8 other countries and funding agencies, and the Nordforsk initiative, which is basically Canada and the U.S., I believe, and the Scandinavian countries. So that would be a more coordinated approach internationally.
And that's the time, bang on. So we'll now turn to MP Jazik for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for your testimony so far. Ms. Barker, you talked a little bit about the vision and specifically that you have in terms of the Arctic and Northern Challenge program. And you referenced that it would be guided by Northerners, the daily lives of Arctic and Northern people, and to ensure that their lives were improved through applied technology and innovation. And you mentioned some specific areas that you were looking at, such as housing and health and food and water. Could you give us some practical examples of some research that's been funded that has shown some practical recommendations for improvement, and perhaps where this has actually been implemented?
Certainly. So I will say that, as mentioned, this is only year 3 of a 7-year-long research program. So our projects are still underway, and our first suite of projects are shortly coming to an end. These are projects that were developed under the Canada Inuit Nunavut United Kingdom Research Program, which is a collaboration with United Kingdom Research and Innovation, Polar Knowledge Canada, Parks Canada, Fonds de Recherche du Québec, and Inuit Taprit Kanatami. Some of those projects, for example, there's the Sikudiak project. Some of you may be aware of Smart Ice. This project is looking at the effects of climate change on hunting routes over sea ice. And so it's partnering remote sensing with drone technology as well as on-ice evaluation of ice conditions to create safer ice conditions and safe passage for Northerners as they are getting out onto the ice and onto the land. So again, all this comes back into an application where the data is owned and operated by Smart Ice offices. We have other projects. I mentioned about working with NNC, the Nunavut Renewable Energy Corporation. That is a project looking at very small-scale renewable energy technologies, specifically for hunting cabins. So this is hunting cabins in the north are an essential part of livelihoods and a way of life, but they are often exempt because they're not a primary residence from funding and availability. So this is looking at very small-scale hydrokinetic opportunities, wind, solar, as well as some retrofits for hunting, and what could that look like. Similarly, we have projects looking at search and rescue as climate change, of course, decreases sea ice conditions. We may see more search and rescue requirements. And so that is partnering a Canadian military, Coast Guard, as well as regional search and rescue auxiliary members, rangers, with coming together for stronger collaboration and coordination in the event that there are these more search and rescue considerations. We have other projects looking at the decreasing air quality, whether that's from wildfires, and what that does at a very engineering scale on your ventilation and your indoor air quality in homes, and what does that look like, and working with the hamlet of Tuktoyaktuk on looking at planning. What do you do, as we all know, that community is very much struggling with the effects of climate change. What do we do from a planning perspective for housing, infrastructure? And so these are the types of projects that we have underway at the moment, and we're looking forward to more starting in the coming years.
Thank you. And as you've said, you're year 3 of a 7-year granting process and so on. Will you be evaluating the results in some way, and then, in other words, creating some sort of feedback loop? Oh, we're seeing progress on this, but we need to do this in addition. Is that part of your mandate?
Yes, very much. So in addition to our internal processes within an NRC, we have a mid-program review to see, how are things moving along. We're also doing a bit of a pilot project right now with Inuit Taprit Kanatami, that Sinuk program that I mentioned. Those projects will be coming to an end. And we also want to do an evaluation by the people for whom this research is supposed to be developed with and carried out with. What do they think of it? How did we do? Where can we improve? We also have a program advisory committee made up of Northern representation, including territorial science advisors, Northern industry, to help us on our way. So we meet twice a year with them to, again, help course correct, look at how things worked or did not. And so, yes, all of that will be part of the process for the program.
Do I have some time left, Madam Chair?
Yes, you have 1 minute and 6 seconds.
Dr. Hewitt, just to follow up a little bit on where Mr. Lobb, I think, was going, you're a member of the Tri-Council. What mechanisms are there to ensure that there isn't duplication between the various granting agencies for research, in this case in the North? We talked a little bit, Ms. Barker did, about collaboration and networking and so on, but is there any sort of formal way of ensuring that there isn't duplication?
Well, I think in the preparation of grants, and this is primarily where applications come from, is individuals who are working in the North or working with Northerners develop proposals. I mean, they're doing some of that work from the start. I mean, if you're preparing a proper proposal, you're verifying first off that there aren't other people doing that, and that's part of the peer review process that's undertaken after that. So when the applications come to the granting councils, the peer review committee, representatives from different disciplines, people who work in the North or who have knowledge of that would be certainly assessing to see right off whether or not projects are duplicating earlier work. And if they're not, that would certainly almost always indicate that a project was less worthy of funding than another for not having caught that. So I think that's part of the key process that we all
That's our
engage
time.
in.
Thank you so much. And so now we will turn to MP Blanche Ashoka for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je salue les témoins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I have a question for Ms. Barker. In your remarks, you said that you have the largest research network. It belongs to the federal government. The federal government invested $22 million over several years. Do you think that it's enough compared to other countries that are in the Arctic?
Particular area, which is applied science and technology and engineering. This is not the scope of all the research that is happening globally. Of course, there are many different disciplines that need to come together for that research. I'm sure, as you've heard before, would more funding be wonderful? Of course. However, we can still be impactful with what we have.
Donc, vous mentionnez qu'il y a un sous-financement de la part du gouvernement fédéral.
You mentioned that the federal government has underfunded research, especially in the Arctic. What are the concrete and immediate effects of that underfunding?
For Arctic research, I suppose, in my opinion, there can be challenges in terms of who's filling that space to fund research. However, there are also opportunities, as I mentioned, the Canada Inuit United Kingdom research program. By doing that collaboration, we tripled the amount of investment that we put in because the United Kingdom was very interested in supporting climate change research. So there are also opportunities for partnerships, bringing in countries with similar priorities together.
Est-ce qu'il y a des membres de votre organisation qui ont déjà fait?
Are there members of your organization that have already tried to convince members of the government to increase funding for research?
Well, so as a departmental corporation, we do benefit from significant appropriations. So the National Research Council receives approximately $1.5 billion in annual appropriations. This funds a vast array of scientific activities. So to give you a flavor, we have 24 installations in 10 provinces. And we also support small and medium-sized enterprises so that we can also see innovation coming out of our small businesses across the country.
Madame Quinn, je crois que vous avez mal compris la question. La question, c'est pas...
Ms. Quinn, I didn't ask how much you received. Is there anyone in your organization that talked to members of the government to tell them, hello, we're missing funding. We can't do research in the polar circle compared to other countries, other colleagues? It seems like we're not on the ball because it's not a priority for the government. And we're not able to have a presence like other countries in terms of their scientific research.
Well, in my own words, I would say that The activities that we're doing in the north are very significant, very impactful. Dr. Barker has already told us a number of examples of projects that are having a real contribution to the north. So I think we have taken many opportunities to disseminate to all Canadians aspects of the research that we're doing in the north, but also more broadly, the research that we undertake in climate change in our labs across the country also have very significant implications in terms of what they'll offer in terms of technologies to the north.
D'accord. Je vais poursuivre sur l'élément.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on the main element of my question, funding. I'm not questioning the efficiency or the importance of the research that you're doing, but when there are countries in the Arctic Circle like Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, what does that mean? Now there's more investment. I'd like to understand this issue. If the biggest research network of Canada is looking at what other countries are doing, do you think about underfunding from the federal government?
This was a recognition in the 2018 ministerial mandate to create a research program on the north to take these funds to create this research. It should also be noted that NRC does do a lot of Arctic research outside of our programs as well. We work very collaboratively with the military, the Coast Guard, so there is other funding that is happening. I suppose there's nothing to stop us being one of many asking for additional funds. However, right now we feel quite fortunate with the funding that we've received to have a very dedicated long-term funding program, which is also critical and something that we don't often see outside of Canada, is that recognition of the time required for these research programs.
D'accord. Je comprends.
Thank you. I understand your response, but I'm trying to understand the relationship between your research and what the chief scientist wrote in her report on the Arctic Circle. She says Canada has one of the most important claims in the Arctic and should be at the forefront of northern research. What do you say to that?
Oui.
Could you repeat the question because I didn't hear? Are you talking about the organization or the Arctic Council? Yes. What is the collaboration that you have with the Arctic Circle?
Federal government departments, academic organizations, and of course Arctic and northern peoples and municipalities. At an international level, we do coordinate in particular right now by choice with the United Kingdom. But in terms of the other polar nations right now, most of that is through networks and research dissemination with each other to have those conversations. How can we learn from each other? Best practices, technologies and tools that may have been developed, you mentioned Norway, Sweden, Finland, may not work in the Canadian Arctic. They have access by rail to their northernmost regions. That's not going to be a factor for our regions. And so we need to coordinate with them and understand how can we learn from each other and look at these opportunities like SINUC to enable that international collaboration.
Thank you. We will now turn to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I'm going to turn to Dr. Hewitt. You know, SSHRC is one of the funding agencies, and you touched on the coordination aspect of that. It's not really an inherent thing. It happens kind of organically through your funding processes. But you also mentioned a couple of other agencies or groups that may provide more of that coordination. I'm just wondering what part you play in them. One is ArcticNet, which from what I understand is a big network of people working in centers of excellence across the country and coordinating around the world. What kind of role does SSHRC play in ArcticNet, and perhaps you could comment on ArcticNet and its role on coordinating Arctic research, and specifically about climate change, which is what we're talking about here today.
I think the most important thing to remember is that we are funders of research that is developed almost exclusively by the individuals who, in fact, are doing the research. So big projects like that are themselves well coordinated. They've been put together in some cases over years. They've applied either for funding from us, from SSHRC, or through tri-agency mechanisms like the Canada First Research Excellence Fund, and then they're adjudicated again by peer review. So this is a way that we help ensure that there isn't overlap and that projects are undertaking research that they're intended to do. We've also started to work more internationally as well on projects that will meet or speak to international priorities, such as the case with the competition that I mentioned before that's being organized by Nordforsk, which is the representative body of the research funding councils of the Nordic countries. And Canada will be joining that. We were invited to join that. There will be specific questions and objectives, as I recall, from the Nordforsk initiative that countries will be looking to put forward. We can provide you with some more information on that. But again, our role is primarily as funders for projects that are developed by the researchers themselves, and more by researchers in northern communities themselves, which is our objective overall. So that's how we work as a funder.
Are there models or buckets of funding set aside for collaborative projects? I know I used to be involved with projects that had researchers from a number of universities working together on a project that was funded by NSERC or whatever, all focusing on the same big question, but coming at it from different angles. Does SSHRC have models for that kind of funding, and does that happen in the Arctic?
Yeah, we do indeed, and projects have been funded in the Arctic. I'm going to pass the mic to my colleague Sylvie Lamoureux, and you can talk a bit about our partnership program and how that works.
Thank you very much. There's the SSHRC-specific programs, and there's also the programs through the TIPS, the Tri-Agency Institutional Programs. Some of these are quite large. So an example of the Canada First Excellent Research Fund in 2022, there was the Quanitac Clean Arctic Shipping Initiative, which was awarded over $91 million, which is a partnership between Memorial University of Newfoundland and the University of Ottawa, but then a host of other partners. So it's a very large, unique partnership, and the Inuit Circumpolar Council was part of the co-development of that. And that's, I think, a shift that we've seen maybe in the past 10, 15 years, where the co-development of the applications and the co-construction of knowledge, the publications, all of that is happening much closer together. So that's one example there. ArcticNet, before, we have 9 SSHRC-funded Canada Research Chairs whose work is on the north. There are 3 NSERC-funded CERCs and Canada 150 research chairs. In the partnership in Inside Grants, some of the projects, we have some in French, which would be on intercultural mediation and conflicts, ontological conflicts, in justice in Nunavik. There's also scoping and storing food governance in Inuit Nunangat. So there's a whole range of topics, and we can send you more information if you'd like on these particular projects, which ones are partnerships, and the types of partners that are there. And I would just like to add, for Nordforsk, when it seemed that we would be invited to join, because we had to be invited to join, the first thing that the team did was to reach out to ITK. So this project is being led by a foreign organization, but we really wanted to work within our zone of control and make sure to bring in ITK as quickly as possible and see how we could influence the call that was eventually launched for this funding opportunity, but really work closely together. And that's very important as well, because the relationship with Indigenous partners is not necessarily the same when we work with some of our international partners. So I think it's an important role that the
Time. Thank you so much. So we'll now turn to MP Tucker for 5 minutes with our second round.
Thank you very much, and thank you for our witnesses being here today. To Ms. Baker, you were talking about the different costs associated with research in the north, and we understand how cold it is in the north and the costs associated with keeping everyone safe and warm. Can you, you were cut off a little bit when you were talking about those costs. Could you expand on those, the challenges of doing research in the north?
Certainly. For the research that the National Research Council has carried out in the north, we do need to be mindful of the costs associated with doing things in the right way with our Indigenous and Northern partners. So that could be costs to ensure that corporations, for example, have adequate data storage for large amounts of data that may be collected through fieldwork or observation studies.
But wouldn't that be the same in the south? So it would be, like, what are the associated different costs in the north then? Because we should be, as we know, consulting on all developments anywhere in Canada, so that's not the difference in the north. What are some of the other costs, though, that drive up the research?
So some of those costs could be, for example, community consultations, so honoraria for working with elders in communities, bringing communities together to help decide on research priorities and how to advance those, looking at things like just inter-city, inter-hamlet travel costs themselves are phenomenally more than the same type of research in the south.
North, what's life like right now with cost of living?
Pardon me?
What's the cost of living in the north right now? Is it
I couldn't.
up, flat? No.
I couldn't answer that question. I'm sorry.
That's what I think why we need to do more research in the north to understand what's going on. NRC has been trying to find solutions for climate change for how many years or how many decades that has NRC been working on climate change?
Shannon?
Well, I can't give you an exact number, but it is decades and decades, of course. There's many aspects of this, and we look at very applied.
I'm going to be running out of time here shortly. So decades on decades working on climate change. And what are some of the solutions? What are the top two solutions that this research has come up with how to mitigate climate change or stop climate change?
So I guess there's a variety of things. We've been looking at climate resilient infrastructure, for example, making sure that engineers and designers have the right data in order to have better design life for buildings across Canada, not just in the north. Again, tools and technologies to support northern communities so that they have better homes that are better able to withstand changing climatic conditions.
How many of these new homes that the NRC has researched or put dollars into finding better designs have been built, roughly?
You need to talk to all the housing corporations across the north because that is their responsibility at a territorial level or at a Inuit regional level for those constructions.
Is there a housing crisis also in the north right now?
My understanding is yes.
Yeah, it's terrible across Canada. Earlier on, Ms. Quinn, you commented on all the impactful contributions this research has done in the north. Could you give us just the top two research things that actually have changed people's lives in the north because of the funding through the NRC?
I'm going to turn to Dr. Barker.
So I would say for some of the research, some of the more impactful things have been looking at things like heat recovery ventilators in homes, recognizing that in a southern landscape, these systems are certified, for example, to perform at so many days at -5 degrees Celsius. Those are inadequate for the north, so we've been working very closely with manufacturers for installation of heat recovery ventilators in a northern context that will perform under the conditions that can be expected in that climate, for example.
Any actual solutions to market, like some of the things you recommended or discovered in the research that has impacted those lives, though?
Yes, so we work right now, for example, with all of our projects. We partner our Industrial Research Assistance Program individuals with these projects to look at tools and technologies that may come out of the research that could be moved over and brought to
That
market.
might come out, but what existing? So we have decades and decades of research. What are some solutions that these are all that might be in products in the future. What have some of the money spent on this research over decades have contributed to the change in lives for people in the North?
So this program itself has only been in place for 3 years, so I can speak about this program. So right now, again, what we're seeing are off-the-shelf technologies that can be modified to perform in the conditions.
Time, would you like to send a written submission to complete that answer? Would you like that, Mr. Tucker? Yes, thank you, so you can submit in writing. Okay, we're now going to turn to MP Diab for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let me start with thanking our witnesses for being here today. It's an interesting study in that some of us, like myself, as a member of Parliament, has not been privy to a lot of experience or in the Arctic. And so it's fascinating to hear what you're saying. And I'm going to give you, Ms. Barker, or Dr. Barker, perhaps rather than sending something in writing, could you, I know you spoke about the pressing issues affecting Northerners and the research program in the North, with technology, innovation, research partnership. And I will just let you continue what you were saying, but I guess the question that we were trying to cover is, what are the research and technologies that would be most beneficial to improve the lives of those living in Canada's Arctic? And I'm going to let you continue with what you didn't have a chance to finish, to sort of, rather than sending it in a brief, we can actually hear it here personally today.
So another example would be looking at wastewater treatment technologies, for example. I think, as many people know, water and wastewater, of course, are critical across the North and in many regions in Canada. NRC in the past has worked to patent technology that could be used for wastewater treatment technologies, and we partner with engineering firms to bring those still in a research context to the North, for example. Right now, we have a project just getting underway in the Yukon, again, looking at pipe systems in that case, and looking at how we can ensure that our infrastructure, buried or otherwise, is robust and will be able to withstand the impacts of climate change. And again, we'll have a good design life going forward.
So thank you for that. You had earlier talked about heat recovery ventilators, and now the wastewater treatment technology. I find it fascinating in that, specifically when you talk about wastewater, I know Halifax, in my own province of Nova Scotia, years ago had that issue in wastewater and had done a lot of studies to clean up our harbor and so on. So I get, obviously a lot of that knowledge transforms to other parts. So with the research that's happening there, I suppose a lot of it could be used in other parts, not just in Canada, but everywhere else. Can you speak to a little bit about the knowledge, I guess, and the research and the innovation? And I know it's only year 3 of 7, but how can we benefit the Arctic and perhaps other parts of the country as well?
A lot of tools and technologies, if they're going to be applicable and useful in the Arctic for a very rural location, if you want to put it like that, will be beneficial elsewhere in our very large country, which has a lot of rural locations and environments. In addition, we have found in the past, working with some industries, are very interested in partnering with northern corporations or northern communities to test their projects or their products in that environment. Because if it's going to perform at, for example, -40 for 5 days in a row in the north, then it will probably work in Montreal. So these types of opportunities, it's not every company or industry that is interested in that, but there are many. And there's many opportunities like that to see how the research that we're doing in partnership with northern organizations can be brought perhaps to a larger market.
So thank you for that. For NSERC, Dr. Hewitt, what is the, as the funder, what have you been seeing in the last few years in terms of the research that is coming through your desks or through your offices? Is it increasing, decreasing, stable? Like, how do you, I just like to know for our own sort of study here.
So I would have to answer anecdotally, but, I've been around for a while, and this is for SSHRC, by the way, not for NSERC. I'll let Dr. Adam answer for NSERC. But I would say that it has increased steadily, in part because of our own policies, which have encouraged greater participation of Indigenous communities and Northern communities in research projects that are submitted to us. And the range is just phenomenal. Everything from legal and jurisdictional issues to language retention, community development. A wonderful project we funded in Labrador, $2.5 million, looking at the impact of the forced migration of thousands of residents of that area, I believe starting in the 30s and 40s, which were absolutely spread to the wind throughout Labrador. The project was designed to help reconnect families that had been broken, to work towards restoring livelihoods, cultural products and goods, education, and so forth. And it's well documented. Love to share that.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you. So now we're going to turn to MP Blanchard-Jocat for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to continue questions for Ms. Barker. A simple question. Do you believe Canada is a world leader in northern research?
Certainly we have been. I think our experts, and again, I'll come at it from an engineering and applied science context, have been sought after for many types of research projects. Our past expertise in oil and gas offshore research is now translating to offshore renewables, for example. We have the greatest experts in the world on sea ice and ice mechanics.
Donc, nous ne sommes plus un leader mondial en recherche nordique. Qu'est-ce qui nous manque?
But if we're no longer a world leader then what is missing?
We need people doing that research. We need to enable our northerners to also be recognized as experts in their knowledge systems as well as a more kind of typical Western science. And we need to share the word about what we do. So a lot of that is communication, global scientific diplomacy, getting word out about the great research that we are doing here.
J'étais sûr que vous allez me dire l'argent, mais bon, je pense que je vais le dire pour vous.
You didn't talk about money, but is there a national strategy for coordinating northern research in Canada?
So at the moment, we do have DM, ADM working level committees around the Arctic broadly. We have, I think as I mentioned earlier, we have a coordination around the various funding sources around Arctic and Northern research, and we have a lot of coordination with our Northern Indigenous partners. So it's coming together, but it is scattered.
C'est quoi les impacts, Madame Barker, de ne pas avoir de stratégie nationale?
And what is the impact of not having a national coordination strategy?
I think we do have coordination. We have an Arctic and Northern policy framework. It is not a strategy. However, it does outline our goals and objectives as a nation for Arctic and Northern endeavors. There is a science goal within there. So to my mind, we do have a rough plan. We need to expand on it. We're working on the implementation plan, is my understanding right now, with our northern partners. And I think that's the most important part, is these conversations to get to a point where we can implement and have that strategy.
Les scientifiques qui font de la recherche dans le Nord actuellement, de quelle façon ils collaborent pour partager leurs recherches?
I think this...
How do scientists collaborate together on their research?
For example, we have a project where the Nunatsiavut government has asked researchers to come together at one time for on-the-land sharing of the science that is happening. So I think there is quite a lot of collaboration and coordination at that level.
Unfortunately. And for our last witness in this round, MP Canning for 2.5 minutes. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm going to continue with Ms. Lamoureux just to allow you to perhaps elaborate on where we were when I was talking about Nordforsk, you were talking about Nordforsk and what that collaboration might look like. We talked about some of the big collaborative projects. Where do you see this becoming a member of Nordforsk will do to how SSHRC operates, or how, what benefits will that bring to our research here in Canada?
So by participating in Nordforsk, SSHRC is contributing money for Canadian researchers, but it's tying us into a larger picture. And I think by having us participate, we're also having impact influencing to make sure that Indigenous voices and Indigenous realities are considered as part of this. So we're, I think, taking some of the good ways that we work with our Indigenous partners and showing this as a way to move forward. And I think tying it into making sure it's a way to coordinate on a specific call and have those opportunities come forth. What is a little bit harder is something that our colleagues were alluding to. We need time to create the relationships. So I think those that already have existing relationships through the different Canada Research Chairs, through the existing funding opportunities like ArcticNet and different things that have come in the past, have a leg up on those that may be just starting relationships. The time frames might be too short, but I think it allows us to look at together at a clear problematic that was chosen by Nordforsk. So I think it's a way to circle that, and we're going to contribute as much as we're going to get out, I think, of this further than we are.
Right. And you mentioned involving ITK, the Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami. How do they fit into the whole organizational structure of what you're doing in Nordforsk, or in general, but Nordforsk in particular?
If I can answer that, because we've been working with them for many, many years. I mean, what it ensures is that communities are going to be directly involved in the development, in the shaping of that research, and then, in response to other questions we heard earlier, to the kind of solutions that this research will bring to those communities. And this is increasingly the model that we're using in terms of funding, working with partners so that they benefit directly from the research that's done, regardless of where it's done, and with partners. One of the things I would add, too, is that the fact of being asked by Nordforsk to participate in this consortium indicates that we do have a presence, that we do have a lot to bring to research in the North. And it was for that reason that we were invited to participate. And our researchers, I think, will benefit tremendously. And this is across all disciplines, by the way.
Over Dr. Hewitt, but that's a wonderful place to wrap up this panel, and thank you so much to the witnesses, Dr. Ann Barker, Dr. Shannon Quinn, Dr. Ted Hewitt, and Dr. Sylvie Lamoureux for your testimonies. We really appreciate that. You may submit additional information through the clerk, and please see the clerk for any questions. We'll suspend briefly now to allow our witnesses to leave, and we'll resume with our second panel of witnesses. Very much. Welcome back. It's now my pleasure to welcome our second panel of witnesses from Polar Environment Atmospheric Research Laboratory, Dr. Kimberly Strong, Professor of Physics at the University of Toronto. From Polar Knowledge Canada, Andrew Applejohn, Executive Director of Programs, and Dr. David Hick, Chief Scientist. So we give you up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, after which we'll proceed with rounds of questions. Dr. Strong, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. I thank the committee for undertaking this study and for inviting me to speak to you about science and research needs in Canada's Arctic. My name is Kimberly Strong. I'm a professor and the chair of the Department of Physics at the University of Toronto. I'm also an atmospheric scientist and the principal investigator of PEARL, the Polar Environment Atmospheric Research Laboratory. My group has been doing research at this location for 25 years. I'm speaking on behalf of the PEARL Science team, which includes colleagues from 9 universities. We also have many partners across Canada and internationally, and work closely with Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Canadian Space Agency. Work at PEARL is conducted under a scientific research license from the Nunavut Research Institute. The Arctic remains one of the Earth's least understood environments, and yet it is a bellwether for climate change, a receptor for global pollution, and a driver for the global climate system. Northern ecosystems, including ice, snow, and permafrost, wildlife and vegetation, and marine systems, are all linked together by our atmosphere. It contains the air we breathe and the protective ozone layer. It stores greenhouse gases. It's where weather happens, and it transports air pollution and wildfire smoke into the Arctic. PEARL is a flagship observatory established in 2005 to track changes happening in the Arctic atmosphere and for determining the causes and global impacts. PEARL is located at 80 degrees north on Ellesmere Island, near the Environment and Climate Change Canada weather station at Eureka, Nunavut. For nearly 20 years, PEARL measurements have provided insight into an array of scientific, policy, and societal issues that are relevant to Arctic communities, Canada, and the world. PEARL's focus on long-term atmospheric measurements in the very high Arctic differentiates it from the research activities of the Canadian Arctic Research Station at Cambridge Bay, from ArcticNet, from the Centre for Northern Studies, and the Amundsen Icebreaker. We're all complementary in what we do. PEARL is an important Canadian station in 5 international observing networks. As the most northerly permanent station for most of these networks, and one of only a few in the Arctic, PEARL measurements fill a very large gap in their geographical coverage. PEARL is also a key site for verifying the data from satellite missions, including the upcoming High-Altitude Aerosols, Water Vapor, and Clouds mission, which will be Canada's contribution to NASA's multi-decadal atmosphere observing system. PEARL offers exceptional educational opportunities and has trained more than 100 students, postdoctoral fellows, and technical staff, most of whom are now working in government, academia, and industry. Our outreach program has been active in 6 northern Nunavut communities through school visits, student researcher collaborations, and workshops for teachers. PEARL is remote and isolated, accessible only by charter aircraft and the annual summer ship visit. The nearest community, Grise Fjord, is more than 400 kilometers to the south by air. PEARL is thus very different from a normal campus-based lab or facility located in a community. The December 2023 report of the expert panel on the future of Arctic and Northern research in Canada highlighted PEARL as a unique and internationally important research facility. The report stated that even where infrastructure is remote and where there are no nearby communities with which to partner, facilities such as PEARL represent critical elements of an effective research system and cannot go overlooked. Over the last 18 years, Canada has invested in PEARL infrastructure, operations, science, and training. However, this investment is now at risk. PEARL needs stable funding that's attuned to being in a unique facility in a unique location. Unfortunately, PEARL does not fit easily into any of Canada's major recurring funding programs. Many of the programs that previously supported PEARL no longer exist, and PEARL's last major grant ended in 2021. PEARL is currently running at a minimal level and will close this year if new funding is not secured soon. Let me summarize my remarks with reference to the 3 points being assessed by the committee's study. Number 1, to understand the consequences and impacts of environmental change, we need to track changes over time. We need a long-term strategy for supporting Arctic research in Canada. a strategy that's inclusive of different approaches, including both Indigenous and Western science, a strategy that encompasses the many different components of the Arctic ecosystem, including the atmosphere, which sometimes gets left out, and a strategy that engages and reflects the needs of local, regional, territorial, national, and international partners. Number two, to fully participate in research, Arctic and Northern populations need access to infrastructure tools and funds. This is true of Arctic research in Canada generally. Pearl is just one example of a facility that's under pressure due to the lack of continuity and sustained operational funding. Establishing research capacity is a huge effort with long lead times. Losing that capacity can happen all too easily. We need sustained funding programs that recognize that research in the Arctic is challenging and expensive, and it should not have a one-size-fits-all model. It should recognize that not all Arctic research is conducted in communities. And finally, number three, collaboration with local and Indigenous communities is vitally important. However, factors like distance, travel costs, and the effort involved in establishing and then sustaining those partnerships presents barriers to meaningful collaboration. This is even more difficult for facilities like Pearl, which don't have the advantage of being located near a community. We need mechanisms to bring together researchers and community members to build cooperative partnerships for long-term and sustainable Arctic research. Thank you again for this opportunity to address the committee.
Thank you. Just bang on the time. You crammed a lot of useful information in your 5 minutes. We appreciate. So now we're going to turn to Dr. Hick for 5 minutes.
Hello, bonjour. I'd like to thank the committee for holding this important hearing. Je suis heureux de vous présenter aujourd'hui.
I'm very happy to present my comments from my organization.
Polar Knowledge Canada for the past 2.5 years. I'm based in Cambridge Bay, Iqaluit in Nunavut, at our headquarters, the Canadian High Arctic Research Station. And I'm joined today by Andrew Applejohn, Executive Director of Programs. The questions that the committee is addressing in this study are both timely and important. The impacts of climate change in the Arctic are already evident and will have an impact on the rest of the country and the entire world. While the impacts of climate change are drastically affecting Arctic people, wildlife infrastructure, and the environment, the consequences of these changes are reverberating throughout the global climate system, influencing extreme weather, wildfires, sea level, and increases in temperatures, with impacts on communities across Canada. The importance of Arctic research at this time cannot be overstated. Ensuring that Northern and Indigenous rights holders, organizations, communities, and partners are directly involved in leading science and research relevant to the Arctic is essential for identifying solutions to address the many challenges facing this region. In October 2007, the speech from the throne acknowledged the need to give greater attention to the Arctic by committing to the development of an integrated northern strategy. Included in this approach was the intention to build a world-class research facility in the Arctic to work on the cutting edge of Arctic issues, including climate change, environmental science, food security, and resource development. 12 years later, in 2019, the community of Cambridge Bay and the representatives of Canada and Nunavut marked the official opening of the Canadian High Arctic Research Station, or CHARS. While the primary focus of the CHARS facility is civilian, its infrastructure and strategic Arctic location can also support, when needed, emergency response or security efforts in the region. In fact, the Canadian High Arctic Research Station will be providing operational support for Canadian Forces Operation Nanook again this summer. Polar's mandate, as established under the Canadian High Arctic Research Station Act, is to undertake and support locally relevant and globally significant knowledge creation. As an organization headquartered in the Canadian North, Polar is fully engaged with northern communities, governments, and organizations to ensure the work it undertakes respects local priorities and returns meaningful benefits to the North. Polar conducts and supports research focused on climate change adaptation, mitigation, and innovation by bringing together diverse groups of experts and, importantly, our northern partners. 3 focus areas guide our work. The first objective is ecosystem science, improving our knowledge of dynamic northern terrestrial, freshwater, and marine ecosystems within the context of rapid change. Over the past decade, we've obtained detailed baseline information about these ecosystems, including rapidly changing abiotic elements such as permafrost, snow, and sea ice. Our second objective is to increase understanding of the connections between northern community wellness and environmental health, including aspects of food security, sovereignty, and safety. This One Health approach recognizes that Northerners will benefit from a better understanding of how changes in the environment affect the abundance and diversity of country foods, the impact of environmental contaminants like mercury and microplastics, and the impact of diseases on northern wildlife. This is consistently a top priority for Northerners. Our third objective is to advance clean energy and cold climate infrastructure solutions for the unique conditions in the Arctic. For example, Northerners have a great interest in cost-effective options for waste and wastewater management, alternative and renewable energy solutions, and building technologies designed for northern conditions. CHARS supports the testing of clean energy solutions, including energy storage, biofuels, and advanced renewable energy technologies by industry, government, and academia prior to technology deployment in remote communities. Northern Polar Knowledge Canada is implementing programs and activities that support our science and technology goals and contribute to building capacity across Northern Canada in several different ways. Polar staff and operating funds are used to conduct research at CHARS in collaboration with researchers from other government departments, academia, communities, and other countries. Polar also provides grants and contributions aligned with our objectives to qualified recipients through open, competitive funding programs. In recent years, these calls have been co-developed with Indigenous and Northern partners to ensure their priorities are being addressed. High-quality Arctic research requires high-quality research infrastructure. Polar is committed to supporting the development of Canadian research infrastructure that is very essential for conducting Arctic research, international collaboration, and advancing the respectful engagement with Arctic Indigenous peoples. Why does this matter? Research is critically important to understand the drivers, the societal and environmental responses, and possible pathways to adapt to these changes.
You
Merci.
can cover some of the rest of that in your testimony. So thank you both for your opening statements. We'll now open the floor for questions. Be sure to indicate to whom your questions are directed, and we'll start with MP Tucker for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, and to the good, thank you for our witnesses, to the good folks at Polar. Climate adaptation versus mitigation is a growing issue, even in the government's Arctic and Northern Policy Framework paper that they released. It is noted that many stakeholders want the government to focus more on adaptation as opposed to mitigation. But in the framework, the importance of adaptation does not really make its way into one of its goals. Would you support a recommendation for a government to place greater emphasis on concrete Arctic adaptation strategies in its official Arctic and Northern strategy?
Well, both are important. So the root cause of many of the environmental changes that are taking place is the greenhouse gas emissions as a result of current energy consumption. And so some of the impacts that influence people, infrastructure, economies, and northern futures will require adaptation. And that's certainly recognized in the north. So adaptation is a key part of how people live every day, recognizing that those changes are already upon us in the north.
What are some of the historic Inuit adaptations that they've used using traditional knowledge to deal with the climate in the north?
Yeah. So not only is there climate change, but there's variability from year to year in seasonality, and that influences where people would go to harvest, what time of year you would go fishing or hunting for caribou in different places, understanding the different landscapes or migratory pathways of species affected by the seasons or the conditions of sea ice. And so people adapt to the local conditions. It's just that the reference point for what the future is going to look like looks very much different from the past, and it's changing very quickly.
And a little bit about the lives in the north and what the local economy in terms of your mandate to advance knowledge of the Canadian Arctic in order to improve economic opportunities, environmental stewardship, and the qualities of life of residents and all other Canadians. How much of your focus is on improving economic opportunities versus the other priorities?
Some of those things go hand in hand. So there's a significant mining industry and growing mining industry in Nunavut. Some large companies have active mines or mines that are currently developed, and those provide all sorts of opportunities for employment for Northerners in communities. But
just on that, sorry, we're going to run out of time.
Yeah.
But the mining activities that are driving, you're saying they're significant and you studied it, but we've also heard that there's essentially no new mines coming on. Is that accurate?
Well, I think there's a long lead time for exploration, and there's certainly a potential for new mines to be developed. But what I was going to say is that in terms of our research, the significance of understanding what's happening to wildlife can influence the type of food sharing, harvesting, opportunities for local economic development through cut and wrap facilities in the Kitikmeot region where we are, that would add potential for local economic development associated with harvesting of country foods.
Back on to some of the economic development that's going on in the north and things that you may or may not have been aware of. It sounds like from our earlier testimony that there has been some Russian activity in the north. Are you aware of any prospecting currently going on in the north from Russia by chance?
I'm not aware of any Russian activity in the Canadian Arctic.
Have you been following the developments with the British Arctic Territory and Russians' involvement in the other end of the globe?
In the Antarctic?
Yes.
Yes. So currently the Antarctic Treaty consultative meetings are taking place in India. Canada is currently applying for consultative party status in the Antarctic Treaty, and so we're following closely what the developments are. There are certainly Russian interests in the Arctic over a long period of time as a party to that treaty, and I think not just with implications for the United Kingdom, but for other consultative parties of the treaty as well.
Thank you so much for your testimony here today.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now turn to MP Longfield for 6 minutes.
Our witnesses. I want to start with Dr. Strong. I was able to get up to Pearl in 2019. I saw the research going there and the number of universities that are involved. University of Toronto being the lead of 9, I think you mentioned. It seems like Pearl has gone from NSERC grant to NSERC grant and is doing longitudinal studies that are giving us changes over time in the atmosphere, now picking up on forest fire implications, looking at droughts and floods and atmospheric conditions that are changing in terms of moisture in the atmosphere. Really important work that seems to be reliant on short-term funding from fund to fund, and now you're in a precarious situation. What's your current ask to try to keep the doors open?
Right, thank you, Mr. Longfield. So our current ask right now, our submission to the pre-budget consultations was $15 million over 6 years. So that's about $2.5 million a year to do the science and also to give us the funding to be able to resume the program that we had in, working with some Nunavut communities. $1.5 million a year would kind of keep us going at a baseline level, but 2.5 is really what we had some years ago, and that's really what we would like to do to be able to allow us to do all the science plus more than science with northern communities.
In terms of the science research, there's new funds now going into the Arctic in other parts, and maybe Dr. Hick, in terms of your organization involvement with an organization like Pearl, is there a communication path there, or is there opportunity there? I'm not asking you to approve funding at the table, but that doesn't seem like a lot of funding to do some very important research in Canada.
Well, I've worked with Dr. Strong for many years, and so we have good lines of communication. We're certainly aware of the valuable work that's been conducted at Pearl over the last couple of decades. And in fact, we're working together to, the Arctic's a big place, so we're working to expand some of the capabilities, observational capabilities that exist at Pearl at CHARS, at the High Arctic Research Station. That'll give us just a better understanding of the dynamics of the whole Arctic system. So in that context, we're supporting the research work, but the work at Pearl itself, as Dr. Strong indicated, given how remote it is, has additional requirements over and above how remote we feel in Cambridge Bay, just that much further into the Canadian high Arctic to maintain those operations.
You've highlighted one of the challenges, that Pearl is quite far north of any population base. The Inuit don't go that far north. Certainly not a lot of voters in that part of the territory. In terms of governance for Pearl, maybe Dr. Strong, how the University of Toronto has taken the lead and really kept the organization going over the last year where there's been a funding gap. But the University of Toronto doesn't qualify to support all of the universities up there in terms of governance. Could you maybe talk about Arctic research having to be a collaboration of governance, or how can we look at our study to support the collaborations that are required to do effective research?
So with Pearl, we really got started back in 2003, 4, 5 when we got funding from the Canada Foundation for Innovation. So that allowed us to install the equipment at existing Environment and Climate Change Canada building, and then bring up some containers and set up 2 other facilities. So we have 3 facilities at Eureka. So it was CFI that really enabled that at the beginning. And then we got 6 years of funding from the Canada Foundation for Climate and Atmospheric Sciences, which no longer exists. So that gave us stable funding for 6 years that enabled us to do, keep operations going and do the science. Then there was a gap for about a year or so, and then we were very fortunate to get funding under the NSERC Climate Change and Atmospheric Research Program, or CCAR, which was a one-off. There were 7 lucky winners, and we got funding from that, which we were able to stretch out to 2001 because of the COVID pandemic. Our expenses went down. We weren't able to travel up so far. We also got funding from the International Polar Year in 2007 and 8, and some funding from the Arctic Research Infrastructure Fund. So those were kind of 5 of the big funding programs, several of which don't exist. CIFCAS, right, CCAR, IPY, they don't exist anymore. And so we also have gotten regular funding from the Canadian Space Agency because we do validation of satellite data, and they've been a very valuable funding partner. And Environment and Climate Change Canada, also because we're working at their facility, they help with some of the power costs, which is not an eligible expense under NSERC and other programs. So, over the last 20 years, we've written many, many proposals. They have not all been successful, but, enough have been. And so the challenge is that every funding program has its own requirements. And, those that require you to have community engagement, it's very hard to do that where we are. Our expenses are high. We try to piggyback on Environment and Climate Change Canada's monthly produce charters that bring food up to the station. But if we typically charter our own flights a couple times a year, they're more than $50,000 a pop, right? And then to have someone on site staying at the station, which is the only place, there's no community there, right? There's just the weather station. That's over $450 a day, right, for food and accommodation. So you send up half a dozen students for a few weeks, the costs add up, right? So having a programs that kind of recognize the cost of being in such a remote location are really quite critical.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now, MP Blanchard-Joca for 6 minutes, please.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I have a question for Mr. Hick. The role of your organization is very important, and promoting knowledge about the region is very important. Your colleague, Anne Barker of Arctic and Northern Challenge Program, mentioned that Canada used to be a leader in northern Arctic research in the past. I'd like to know why we're no longer a leader.
Someone have a quick look at this? I just want to make sure I understand properly.
We're going to pause because of a translation issue.
Maybe you could repeat that. I'm sorry.
La question était pour Monsieur Hick.
No, it's not working. I'm sorry, it's not working. Maybe I'll try plugging it in over here.
While we sort out this translation issue, and I've stopped your time.
Alors, première
Thank you. First question is for Dr. Hick. Your colleague, Ann Barker, Director, Arctic and Northern Challenge Program, said that in the past, Canada was a world leader in Arctic research, and it is no longer the case. I would like to know from your point of view what the role is and why that is no longer the case, that we're world leaders.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I might not entirely agree with my colleague, with Anne. We work together on a number of programs. I think that it's important to recognize we can't be leaders in absolutely everything, and there are many countries that have expertise that's very complementary and overlaps with Canadian expertise. It's a relatively small science community in the Arctic, and we all work closely together. Investments in the last 20 years through ArcticNet, through the International Polar Year, the last International Polar Year, through a number of other programs, have really built a capacity for the next generation of Arctic science in Canada. I think what's important to realize is that it's not so much what we do sometimes, it's how we go about doing it. And it's that work, the way that we're working with, putting the priority on ensuring that Indigenous and Northern Canadians that are that should be leading that work are involved. And that's taken a little bit of time, but I think when I meet with international colleagues, in many respects, they look at Canada with a little bit of envy that we've managed to advance on certain issues. Technical issues, there's other countries that sometimes perhaps have additional expertise or capabilities than we do. But I think we are world leaders in many ways.
Merci, M. Hick. Je veux bien être certain de comprendre vos propos.
Thank you. I want to make sure that I understand what you said, because the chief scientist said in her last report that Canada has one of the most important land claims in the Arctic, and Canada should aspire to be a leader within the polar countries, and it should, similarly as the way it tries to be a leader in other areas. Are you do you agree with that?
I would agree. Canada needs to be a leader in polar science and Arctic science across all of our north, not just in one area.
Donc, je veux savoir si vous êtes d'accord.
So if you agree, what would it take for Canada to become a world leader once again? Why are we no longer world leaders?
Well, as I said, I think in some areas we are still very much world leaders. Our expertise, our scientists are sought after as partners on international collaborative programs with other countries. And certainly within our own country, there's many things that we are leaders on. But in a rapidly changing environment, there are unknowns, and those are the things that we need to be aware of and continue to invest in. I think funding is one part of it, but there's also making sure that we create the forum for us to understand what the priorities are, who has expertise, who can bring expertise into those programs. And that's an important part of the work that Polar Knowledge Canada is doing.
Merci, M. Hick. Est-ce que le Canada...
Thank you. Should Canada have a national strategy to better coordinate northern scientific research activities?
So many departments and agencies are involved in supporting different aspects of Canada's Arctic science activities, and many of those organizations, like our own, like Polar Knowledge Canada, have frameworks or strategies that are focused on particular topics. What I think you're asking is, should there be a national Arctic strategy? Within the Arctic and Northern Framework Policy, there's a number of goals and sub-goals that specifically address research requirements. I think what's important and what we've learned over the last years is that those need to be co-developed with Northerners, with the territorial governments, with Indigenous organizations, with communities, with the various bodies of the land claims and rights holders agreements. So I don't think it's as easy as it sounds to just say we're going to create a national policy, because regionally and locally those have a nuance as well.
So final witness for this first round is MP Cannings for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. I'm going to start with Dr. Hick, if only because we kind of go way back to the research that Dr. Hick started on the tundra ecosystems in the southwestern Yukon, and has continued that line until his very new job in the last couple of years. But when we talk about, this study is about research in the Arctic, especially with regards to climate change, and the urgency there is because climate change is impacting the Arctic at a much greater speed than it is us in temperate or tropical latitudes. And you mentioned things like ice extent, permafrost. Some of the most important research, and it may not be the sexiest, is those long-term monitoring data sets that tackle those questions. How can we fix something that we don't know about? And I'll ask Dr. Strong about this as well, but can you talk about the importance of long-term data sets, 10, 20, 30 or more years, and how, they are priceless when it comes to understanding our world. I'm just wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That's a very important question, because I think that's at the heart of being able to develop adaptation, mitigation responses, is knowing what's changing. How quickly is it changing? Is it a cycle, or is it just a perturbation, or is it really a long-term directional change? And for that, we do need longer-term records. We have many of those records in Canada. Maintaining them in the long term is a challenge. A lot of people are committed to maintaining those records. But we're realizing that historically we have observations in certain places that may not be where the largest changes are taking place, or where the impacts of current changes are being observed. And those places are in remote places like Pearl, or in the Northwest Passage, where accessing and maintaining marine buoy observations is something that can be done only during a very short window during the season, the open water season. All of these things we're realizing are complemented by the local and community and Indigenous knowledge that lets us extend our understanding of changes much further back in time. So when we talk about scientific observations, perhaps only over 20 years, once we start understanding how people who have lived in those places have observed that environment over generations, it puts things into a better context for us, and allows us to better forecast what might happen in the near future.
And Dr. Strong, at Pearl, you have a 20-year data set, and it sort of breaks my heart to hear that Pearl is facing closure. I just think, another long-term data set under fire. I'm just wondering if you could comment on the importance of this kind of work.
So I certainly, agree with what David said. Long-term measurements are really the lifeblood of understanding what's happening in the Arctic. With the long-term data sets that we've recorded, I started doing measurements in spring of 1999, so this is the 25th anniversary of measurements of ozone and some gases involved in ozone depletion. And as a result of that record, we were able to see from year to year there's a lot of variability in stratospheric ozone, which protects us from harmful UV. And so the years where we had very low ozone in 2011, 2020, that really was there visible in the record because we had the long-term baseline. Similarly, with wildfire smoke, we're also measuring wildfire smoke. We see plumes coming up over Eureka. And for example, the fires in the Pacific Northwest and BC in August of 2017 injected record amounts of a number of different pollutants into the atmosphere, and they came right over Pearl, and we had these big spikes. And again, they were very obvious compared to the baseline that we'd collected over years. Same thing with the aerosols and clouds and other things that we're measuring. Because of COVID, which limited our access to Pearl, we now have some, and then funding, we now have gaps in some of our data records because some of the instruments, they need maintenance, but we no longer have an operator on site year-round. And so you can't go back, right? So the measurements that we didn't get after March 2020 for some of our instruments, we're never going to go back and get those, right? So we've got some instruments still running, some are automated, some we have remote control for. We have some campaigns to go up and do things, but we don't have we used to have an on-site operator year-round who would deal with issues, minor issues, but right now we're not able to do that. So we sadly have gaps, and what we'd like to ramp back up to where we were.
How much? 44 seconds. Well, I'll go back to Dr. Hicken. Maybe if you could just spend a little bit of time on this connections between community wellness and environmental wellness in the Arctic.
I'm just going to pass it to Andrew to talk about a Caribou project that I think is relevant to that.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question. There's a close connection between how people live, particularly in smaller, more isolated northern communities, and environmental health. Polar made a strategic investment with the government of the Northwest Territories starting about 2 years ago, and it came into effect this year, to look at a variety of perspectives on what's driving the extreme variability in barren ground caribou populations. Those programs that were funded through that collaboration were done in a way that really provided communities with the opportunity to play a leadership role. So I believe there were 7 programs funded, and the majority of those programs focus on community perspectives in terms of what's changing on the landscape, what's changing with animal behavior, some of the influences potentially driving the health of some herds versus other herds. So it was a program that was conceived really in response to pressure coming from communities asking questions about what's happening, what's driving caribou population change.
Thank you. So that's the time. So thank you very much. So we'll now go to our second round. So we will start with MP Soroka for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the witnesses. And I first want to start off with the fact that our Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Mona Niemer, has been 3 months and still hasn't responded back with our questions. Can we get the clerk to once again reach out to her? I'll also start with Dr. Hick. You mentioned about food. With the emphasis on food and energy security in your recent initiatives, what innovative approaches are being explored to ensure sustainable solutions for Arctic communities, and how can federal policies better support these efforts?
So thank you. I'll perhaps provide 2 questions. One is there's an important need to be able to share food in communities. When hunters and harvesters and fishers are out, they bring food back not just for themselves but for elders and for the community. And traditionally, being able to have community freezers and have that as a focal point for food sharing and food storage over seasons has been relatively easy. With warming, we've needed to look at innovative options and new solutions. So we're working very closely with hunters and trappers organizations, wildlife management boards, and communities to look at how community freezers could be adapted to warming conditions. Everything from sea cans that are powered by clean energy to ways of actually preserving or packing and sharing things more efficiently. We're also working on greenhouse technologies. There's very high cost and challenge in transporting fresh produce in the north, and so there's in the Kitikmeot region alone, there's 3 separate greenhouse projects over the last few years, looking at different ways that community-supported growing of foods of interest could be commercially viable in those communities, and those are both very much close to being adapted or adopted by different communities to serve their needs, recognizing that different communities might have different requirements.
Okay. How effective has the collaboration between scientists and policymakers been in addressing Arctic challenges, and what improvements do you suggest to ensure that scientific research more directly informs policy decisions?
Thank you. That's an important question for all of us to think about, is how to ensure that science policy nexus is something that is readily apparent on what those knowledge mobilization and knowledge sharing pathways are, to make sure that information is shared in a timely way, also make sure it's appropriate. So there are a number of forums for doing that. One of the ways we do that is meeting once or twice a year with the hamlets and hunters and trappers organization, wildlife management boards, or Inuit development corporations or organizations in Nunavut, and with the other equivalent indigenous organizations in Northwest Territories and Nunavut, so that we can share information that we're learning or others in the research community are learning with community members. I think it's important that be normalized and done on a regular basis. So we're invited to those meetings. We make sure we always have someone attending, and that provides a mechanism for feedback. Does that get up to the federal level? Well, we need to find other mechanisms for that, but we need to be able to share things locally, regionally, at the territorial level and or provincial level in some cases, and also with federal colleagues and with
Okay,
with
so
policymakers.
there's still lots of work to be done. Dr. Strong, what technological advancements have been most impactful in your atmospheric research, particularly in remote sensing techniques? Are there emerging technologies that you believe will significantly enhance our ability to monitor and understand the Arctic atmosphere?
That's a good question. So one of the things that Pearl is quite useful as a site for testing instruments, particularly under really harsh conditions. We have, for example, been testing solar panels for a Canadian solar panel company, and they're very interested to see how well they perform, and then perhaps we'll deploy them elsewhere in northern Canada. One thing that we helped do was to evaluate the performance of an infrared instrument that is going to be deployed on Canada's HAWK mission that I mentioned earlier. This is Canada's contribution to the Atmosphere Observing System that NASA will be launching later this decade. And so LR Tech and ABB, they developed this technology, and we had it at Eureka. We had it side by side with an instrument that's been there, a longer term. Did side by side measurements to evaluate the performance of that instrument and prove that it would be able to do the kind of cloud measurements that we want to do from space. And so that's been very useful. And that instrument is now being actively developed for deployment on a satellite later this decade.
Strong, that is a bit over our time. So now, MP Chen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. My question to Dr. Strong is that you've mentioned today in your testimony that Pearl is running out of money. And it's a bit heartbreaking to hear, because Pearl plays such an important role in bringing researchers together in an important facility that is widely regarded as important and crucial to produce knowledge around climate change, the atmosphere, pollutants, and how they interact with the environment. In terms of funding, I know you've had moments in the past in your history since being formed in 2005 where you have been challenged with financially challenged. And so my question to you is twofold. One is, can you shed some light in terms of helping us understand how you have been funded? And secondly, what does sustainable long-term funding look like?
To my earlier answer, so the initial equipment was bought with CFI funding, and then we had this six-year project grant from the Canada Foundation for Climate and Atmospheric Sciences, which is an organization that no longer exists. Then we had a 6-year grant from the Climate Change and Atmospheric Research Program at NSERC, which was kind of a follow-on from CIFCAS, and that program no longer exists. Those were our two, kind of primary science funding programs. And then, as I mentioned, we had some funding from International Polar Year, from the Arctic Research Infrastructure Fund. We've kind of had regular small amounts of money from the Canadian Space Agency that have helped, and some support from Environment and Climate Change Canada. And then also, we had funding from NSERC, for example, for an NSERC Create training program in Arctic atmospheric science that funded us for 6 years, from 2010 to 2016. And that really funded students. And we ran 6 Arctic summer schools as part of that. So that wasn't supporting the lab per se, but it was supporting the students who were doing some of the research at the lab. And at the summer schools, we brought in Inuit and other northern representatives to come and talk to the students. So that was very enlightening for them. So, in terms of looking forward, we kind of need, programs that will cover the operational expenses of working in the Arctic, right, which is different from working at a university lab down south. So that recognize the cost of transport, travel, and on-site accommodations that can fund the staff that you kind of need. So that kind of operational funding, we don't. We are always looking for programs to apply to, but many of them have different requirements, and it can be hard to meet the criteria because none of them are quite like the CIFCAS and the CCAR funding that we had in the past.
And so looking into the future, if there was a way that government could help support your work in a more stable way, how do you envision that to flow through?
Research facilities. I know there's work going on in government looking at major research facilities right now. So the very large ones, like Triumph and Snow Lab and Oceans Network. I just finished a 5-year term on the Snow Lab board a few weeks ago, so well aware of how that works. But also able to fund smaller research facilities. Right. I mean, Pearl is just one, facility. It's a fairly large one compared to some others, but there's an organization called the Canadian Network of Northern Research Operators, which includes several dozen stations across the north. And that's really been struggling over the years. They did try to get some funding some years ago, but because it was a disparate group, not all under one university, it's kind of hard to fund that broadly. So, some kind of funding that maybe isn't major, but is kind of medium-sized, or even some smaller for some small research stations too, that can provide that continuity so that you can get staff and they can build up the expertise and keep things going. So that's kind of what we're looking for. Not just Pearl, it's other stations as well that are struggling.
Other countries that are involved in research and in the Arctic, how are there any examples that you can give in terms of how other nations support research labs such as yours or other activities related to better understanding the climate in the north? Right.
So, I mean,
Short answer, please. We're down to 10 seconds.
I can't comment on details of how they're funded, but I certainly know that we partner with labs at Ny-Ålesund, Sodankila in Finland, and they have funding through European-wide and national programs that they can tap into, but obviously we don't have access to those. I don't know, but very short answer.
Thank you very much. So now we will turn to MP Blanchard-Jalka for 2.5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente, je poursuis avec Monsieur Hick.
Thank you. Ms. Dr. Hick, Canada signed an accord on May 11th, 2017 for cooperation in the North. One of the objectives was to attract international scientists. Do you think that Canada has been able to attract international scientists?
Thank you, Missy. I think even before that Arctic Council agreement, Canada was very attractive for international collaboration and partnership. And the intent was to facilitate the mobility or improve the mobility of researchers, of infrastructures, of samples or data. And that agreement has been enabled through 3 Arctic Science ministerial meetings up until the last one was in 2020. There's a pause right now, but that's been important. I think Canada is a very attractive place for international researchers, and that agreement helped a little bit, but there were already lots of mechanisms in place.
Monsieur Hick, je suis un peu confus parce que Richard Boudreau, qui est le premier président de savoir.
Dr. Hick, Richard Boudreau, the first chair of Polar Knowledge Canada, he testified and said that there aren't enough researchers here, that Iceland has far more researchers per square meter than Canada, and that there's a shortfall of about $500 million. So I don't know if it's your current position that is stopping you from telling us the truth, or if Dr. Boudreau was wrong. I'd like to hear you on that.
I'm not sure what his how his calculations were made. I was in Iceland yesterday morning, and it's a much smaller country, so maybe the density per square meter of scientists is higher. But look, I mean, quite honestly, I think we have a wonderful community of researchers across Canada, in the academic community, in government, and increasingly in the north.
Monsieur Hick, je vais vous répéter ce que M. Boudreau nous a dit. Il nous manque 3-4.
Dr. Boudreau said we need 3 to 4 more researchers to reach the average of our colleagues in the Polar Circle. And you say that since 2017 you've been able to attract international talent. There is a contradiction there. Dr. Boudreau was the first chair of Polar Knowledge Canada. So either you don't have the full picture, or you're not telling us the full reality.
So I think there's two things. There's the researchers, Canadian researchers that are trained and working in Canada, and there's researchers from international countries or other countries that are collaborators in conducting research in Canada. And there's been growth, in my experience, there's been growth in both of those communities. There have been Canadian researchers, and there's more and more interest from international researchers.
So now for our final questioner today, MP Cannings, for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. Continue with Dr. Hick. You know, Polar Knowledge Canada is based in Cambridge Bay, where CHARS is. I'm just wondering, how do you coordinate things across the Arctic, from Herschel Island or Kluane to Pond Inlet to Nunavik, when you're in a remote area yourself? You know, the Arctic, as you said, is a very big place. How do you manage to develop your mandate over that huge area?
Yeah, thank you for that question. There are challenges having a federal agency headquartered in Cambridge Bay on an Arctic island, and there's lots of challenges that go along with operating there. But we have staff in Yukon, in Whitehorse, we have staff in Yellowknife, we have staff in Rankin Inlet, we have staff in Iqaluit in the north, and we have staff across Canada working not just in the National Capital Region, but in other locations as well, often co-located with other federal departments, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, or with universities, or with wildlife health laboratories. So we're able to leverage those relationships and have an ear on the ground, if you will, with organizations, with people in other communities, very directly, by having staff that are not just concentrated in Cambridge Bay in the north, but located in other communities. And that's at the research scientist level, it's at the staff level, it's at the executive level as well.
That's okay. I'll
Thank
leave
you.
it there.
Thank you very much to our witnesses, Dr. Kimberly Strong, Andrew Applejohn, and Dr. David Hick, for your testimony and participation in relation to our study of science and research in Canada's Arctic in relation to climate change. So you may submit additional information through the clerk, and please see the clerk for any questions. And again, we thank you. It was fascinating testimony today. So before we adjourn, I want to make a brief reminder to members that at Thursday's meeting, we will continue our study on science and research in Canada's Arctic in relation to climate change for 1 hour. Then we will resume consideration of the draft report for the study of the integration of Indigenous traditional knowledge and science in government policy development. We'll also consider the travel budget proposal that was shared with members yesterday. It came out to your P9s, I believe, around 5 p.m. It's very detailed. I would congratulate the clerk and the support staff and our analysts for coming up with a very comprehensive proposal, which hopefully you'll have a chance to look at so that we can consider it fully on Thursday. We'll need to make a decision on that so we can get it submitted by the deadline Friday. So anyway, thank you very much. And is it the will of the committee to adjourn our meeting? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.